So, what I'm about to share with you is a deeply personal story, which hopefully will resonate with you so that your journey to self healing is shorter and less bumpy. I want this talk to be interactive, and I will ask you a series of questions, which are intended to take you further on your journey. Feel free to comment on this video. I will always seek to reply personally. So my first question is, how do you represent weak boundaries and pleasing behavior to yourself? This first phase of the journey is about learning to call a spade a spade. What I now see and call weak boundaries and pleasing behavior, for the longest time I simply saw as aspects of my personality and character. And they also had much more congenial names. So I viewed myself as a particularly caring person who was happy to go that extra mile for others, even if it cost me a lot of energy and left me exhausted at the end of the day. In my 20s, as I was qualifying and working hard as a lawyer, it would not occur to me to refuse a friend's invitation. It was not so much due to fear of missing out, but an inability to say no, which I did not even perceive. Needless to say, my inability to say no at work was even greater. This is how I did things, and this was normal. I did see that I was much more exhausted than others, and if I had reflected, I would have also seen that I was much more sensitive than others. But instead of creating boundaries so I could recharge, I simply viewed my getting exhausted as a slight weakness that I just had to push past. There are other things I have noticed, such as getting completely drained in large crowds, which are abundant in London where I lived. Almost 20 years later, did I come to see that I'm a highly sensitive person. Otherwise known as empaths, um, as another term for highly sensitive person. So if you recognize yourself in my story, you can complete the highly sensitive person checklist linked to the comments to see if you are one. If you remember being told as a child, don't be so sensitive, it is highly likely that you are. So this first phase of my journey is characterized as being unconscious of the problematic nature of these patterns. I was aware of the behaviors, but I was not aware that I was in need of healing. It was around 25 years later, after getting certified to help people overcome intergenerational and developmental trauma, that I discovered that a lot of the behaviors that seem so natural but are in fact limiting in our life, such as weak boundaries and people pleasing, are in fact adaptive protection or survival mechanisms, which we can heal. As I tell you the second part of my journey, I invite you to consider how your over-helpfulness and pleasing might have developed in your life and how they might have served you as survival strategies. So in my developing consciousness, I began to see that the constant prioritizing of the wants and needs of others was not just being helpful, generous, and caring, things which I have been complimented on as a child, but that they came at a personal cost that was too high in the circumstances. When I came to see this more and more clearly, I was puzzled at first, and as time went on, I found myself unable to change the habitual patterns by sheer willpower. I started to become frustrated. Sometimes I felt I was being taken advantage of. I started resenting being over-helpful and still unable to stop it. It is at this moment that I made an amazing discovery. These limiting behaviors had a function which had simply outlived its usefulness. They made sense in the context of my childhood. We develop people pleasing and lack of boundaries as children in an attempt to create a feeling of safety and attachment to our caregivers. These are highly adaptive strategies that have helped us survive and thrive in the conditions we found ourselves in. So, this is in a nutshell how this mechanism works. A child is fully dependent for its needs on its caregivers. If the caregivers are unpredictable, neglectful, or even abusive, the child will adapt. Its only way to survive is to maintain connection with the caregivers, to maintain the attachment bond. Depending on the circumstances, the child may become hypervigilant so that it can predict the sudden mood shifts of the adults around it. This accounts for the extraordinary abilities of empaths to tune into the emotional state of others, their ability to read the room as well as the individuals within it. If the parents were misattuned or neglectful, the child would learn self-reliance but also develop the conviction that it is alone in the world and it cannot trust others. As environmental failure moves down the scale towards abuse, whether physical or emotional, the survival of the child still depending on keeping an attachment bond to the parents. The price it pays for maintaining that bond is deep shame and lack of self-worth. Survival demands that the child choose the attachment. So the child sacrificed its self-image. It cannot contemplate being a good child in a bad environment. So it assumes it must be bad in order to keep the attachment to the caregiver. A second part of this developmental puzzle is that children are meant to be children and not assume a caring role towards the parent. There are extreme cases, as always here, where a child is placed in a position of having to take care physically of a parent or siblings. But in the majority of cases, the role reversal occurs on an emotional level. Parents who are overburdened or emotionally immature themselves are unable to co-regulate the emotions of their children. At a later age, parents seek emotional support in their children, which would normally be provided by a parent or by a partner. This dynamic is referred to as parentification and is particularly damaging to the child. The child now has to take on the role of being a parent's confidant or to fulfill the parent's career dreams. In all aspects, the child assumes that it is responsible for the parent's happiness and is exhausted by its own efforts to please the parent. The curious thing is that however much the child tries to please the parent, the efforts are less and less appreciated. It is a destructive dynamic that needs to be seen and named for what it is. The underlying reasons for this parentification dynamic can be complex. One can be horizontal, such as when a father seeks emotional support in the daughter, which would normally be provided by a partner. The appropriate source of this emotional support may not be available, as the mother might be unable to provide the support due to her own trauma, or maybe has died, or the relationship between the father and the mother might have broken down. Similarly, if a father dies leaving his wife and children behind, it is often that the oldest child or the oldest son would step into the father's role, a heavy burden for the child. Another underlying reason for the parentification dynamic may be intergenerational. The parent who is inappropriately seeking emotional support in the child most likely themselves have missed attuned parenting. The parent is seeking in the child the parental love that they themselves have missed. This is a hole that can never be filled by the child. And in most cases, the parent is not even aware that this is what they're doing. And even this developmental trauma at the level of the parent usually has intergenerational origin. For example, the grandmother's misattuned parenting of the parent might have been due to her trauma of losing her own mother prematurely. So, having heard that our limiting patterns, like people pleasing and weak boundaries, have had developmentally protective functions, can you trace how they have developed in your context? Did one or both of your parents have unpredictable tempers that required you to be super attuned to sudden shifts in mood in your environment as a child? Did your parents make you responsible for the younger siblings or for their own emotional well being? Do you feel guilty the whole time in relating to one or both of your parents? So, how to heal from parentification? How do you restore healthy boundaries and stop pleasing behavior? So, in a nutshell, in responding in these limiting ways to the present moment, we're still stuck in our child consciousness. This is what is meant by the inner child. We react to present situations in our adult body from this inner child which we're unaware of. The reason why it feels so threatening to us to set boundaries is that for the child we once were, it was very threatening. Our parents could have exploded in anger. We might have been hit. With small steps, you can discover that setting boundaries is now safe. You will just need to calm the inner child down. Be prepared to feel its pain and disappointment. At times, these suppressed feelings may feel overwhelming, but they're not. Let them come to the surface. Witness them with compassion and let them go. That inner child's part of you needs to feel seen and heard. It wants its innermost pain witnessed. I'll help you do that in various meditations I have recorded on my channel. And if you would like to learn more, please join one of my groups at flowandpurpose.com. Thank you very much for watching.